Okay, welcome back. It is 9/7 of 2015. We're going to continue on with our look at Aristotle and his psychology. And we're going to add the dimension of imagination. So we've got a little bit extra data, but not a whole lot. The Treatise on the Soul by Aristotle is simply an outline or a framework, and you really have to integrate it with other works in metaphysics and in logic. He doesn't give a full representation in his Treatise on the Soul, so it simply is a outline type presentation, and it really lacks quite a bit of the detail that we got with Aquinas. So Aquinas actually drew from a variety of Aristotle's texts, and not simply his Treatise on the Soul. Because with Aquinas we had a great deal of content and a geometry that was really very integrated with a lot of subsystems and really detailed. But we don't have that with Aristotle. The Treatise on the Soul is simply an outline. We want to look at it now with the introduction of imagination. And basically we begin with sensation, with the sentient soul, and the sensations are received as discernment and imaging. The self discerns a ratio of the lower extreme quality to the higher extreme quality. As an example, say from white to black, and then the ratio would be some shade of gray. But whenever we form an image of a sensation, we form it as a ratio of the extremes. And then we form a percept, or a sensible psychical object of being, what Aquinas called a phantasm. And perception in sensation is always true of its proper object. We do form an emotional judgment along with the percept that we simply desire it as pursued, or we want to avoid it as that which is to be negated. We do end up with a lexical network of sensible percepts that we form, or a lexical network of phantasms, as was stated by Aquinas. But the soul will overall combine nutrition and then sensation here. Also, we're going to move on to thought. It'll combine thought, and it will combine movement, because sensation and thought are going to combine to move on to movement. Soul is first principle of the body. It's the form of the body. It is also a final cause or intentionality of the body. But the sentient soul is the modality that defines the emotional body state of the self, or the change of the emotional body state of the self. And we always experience our sensations as a self already participating in the cognitive work of knowledge, of acquiring knowledge, and forming our self already in the process of forming a sign model. So sensation performs the first task of grasping the form of a sensation without the matter as a psychical image. Now what we pick up now is Aristotle does list imagination as a subsystem of the sentient soul. So sentient soul does include a subsystem of imagination, which is the realm of memory and recollection. And under memory, the realm of memory contains the previous sensations that were learned and thought and became psychical phantasms. So once a sensation is converted to psychical image, it becomes a component of the memory index. It becomes a member of the realm of memory. Now, abbreviated under these psychical phantasms are the magnitude of qualities, their aspect of motion, and their location along the temporal continuum. So all of those attributes are included with the cyclical image that we keep on file and in memory. But as far as the actual rational work, we do some rational work in the sentient soul. The sentient soul does include reason. It does participate in the ideal rational aspect of the soul. And so it does perform recollection at the level of the sentient soul. The self recalls the cyclical phantasms because they're going to become affections of judgment which will be applied to the event which is currently under consideration in the present. So recollection is all about acquiring past phantasms to be comparatively used as helping us to form cognitive judgment. So they take on a very important role. Recollection assists us in forming our judgment of the phantasm and trying to raise it to beyond generalizations, to signification. So we call up these phantasms in recollection as a likeness of the percept, as a likeness or mirror image of the percept. And it's in order to assist us in raising the percepts beyond generalization to signification that we're currently considering. Well, in order to do that, we have to enlist rational deliberation from recollection. We recall previous encounters with similar percepts. We call them up as copies or likeness of the percept, and we deliberate over those to form to apprehend an affection of judgment type evaluative help in order to raise a generalization to a signification in our work in our more cognitive work. So we do initiate deliberation by generating mental impulses towards sought-out objects from recollection. And we do raise recollection to its own time and to the overall temporal continuum. So we do grasp our recollections as participating in their own time, their own motion, but we do picture them along the overall universal temporal continuum. But a key note that we need to look at under recollection is that note C, because primarily recollection is all about raising generalization to signification through deliberation in order to reach closely connected concepts. So it's kind of a looking for associative concepts that could be related to the signification we're currently working on in the present event. We look for associative signs and associative concepts and the recollected memory that will help us to interpret and to raise generalizations to signification. So we look for that which is close in the order. Remember, there's a hierarchy of being in concepts, and so they're all related one to another structurally, and so if we can grasp a concept that is close to that which we are considering, it can help us in our interpretation, in our attempt to raise generalizations to signification. So it's all about trying to grasp other concepts that are close to that which we're considering. Recollection is about grasping the surrounding concepts of the sign we're considering. But for Aristotle, he wants to point out that it's kind of a pre-cognitive work. He really likes to locate this in the sentient soul. Recollection isn't 100% cognitive. It's first primitive cognitive work. It's pre-cognitive in a way. It's not really the true speculative intellect that's going to form the sign model. It's a preparatory work. It kind of evolves out of the sentient soul, but the sentient soul does participate in that foundational rational structure of the psyche. So it can perform a rational function of recollection, but it's not the purely speculative work of our rational speculative intellect. It's kind of pre-cognitive work. For Aristotle, he wants to really locate it in the sentient soul. He's very determined to keep it in the sentient soul. And that's why I've got it listed on the chart as a subsystem of sensation. Even though it does deal with reason and it does deal with deliberation, it's a pre-cognitive or proto-cognitive type of work, which is basically association, gathering up associative concepts. So after we gather up associative concepts that can help us perform interpretive work in the cognitive intellect, we move on to that possible intellect. And we have the three foundational axioms: that the mind possesses a capacity to receive the form of an object, the abstract form, and it is capable of thinking in itself, of performing true introspective and reflective cognitive work, and that the forms, or the ideal forms for anything, are simply potentialities. They don't pre-exist a priori. They are potentialities that exist in the mind and are waiting to be actualized, but they are not already a priori actualizations. There is an agent intellect, but the agent intellect is simply a term for potential knowledge, and possible intellect is a term for actual knowledge. But possible intellect does perform a first judgment of its own, which is similar. It's an affirmation or negation of the intelligible object that has been generalized out of the percept. Because remember, when the percept is transferred to the speculative intellect, it goes through a transformation from percept to generalization. So sensation gets transformed to percept when it enters the sentient soul, but percept gets transformed into generalization when it enters the cognitive soul. So we do work on intelligible images as generalizations in the cognitive possible intellect. Now the intellect is that which will eventually posit the practical intellect that will create the act of existence or motion. There are four kinds of movement. There's the change of a position in space. There's change of a psychical or mental state. There's decay, and there's growth. Now the movement of mind itself is thinking, of course. The mind is independent substance that can think in itself. It is the form and the intentionality of body. And it does have the potentiality of knowledge as sleeping and the actuality of knowledge as waking. But it is this work of taking the generalization, taking the percept, forming it first as a generalization, as an intelligible object, and then gathering up those associative concepts that we gathered in recollection, and then by using the generalization in conjunction with the associative concepts that we've gathered up, and by understanding the temporal continuum of that which we have recalled, because we do work within temporal continuum here in the cognitive realm, we're able to actually raise the generalizations to its deeper significance or true sign value or concept. And once we do that, we can take that lexical network and we can form an actual model that reflects the hierarchy of being. The hierarchy of being, because for Aristotle, all of reality, all of nature is headed as a teleosis toward the good. It's a teleology. It's a teleosis toward the good. As far as Aristotle is concerned, we're involved in a teleosis of movement of reality toward the good. And that teleosis asks for our participation by grasping the significations that are involved and forming them into a model of the good that we can posit as practical mind out of the speculative intellect. And so we're going to move on from our sensation, recollection, and cognition to the posited practical mind. And we do that after passing through the dialogue at Aristotle's Dokunta threshold, where we kind of share our ideas and refine them. But after that sharing and refinement, we're going to take our posited practical model, and we're going to go to the practical modality of movement as practical mind and appetite. For Aristotle, positing, the realm of positing, the realm of inexistence, is all about appetite. Now, the possible intellect always remains still and holds the universal and the ideal sign model, but when the possible intellect is posited, it becomes individual, practical, and focused on practical eschatological end. So we take our universal sign model, we compress it down into an individuality of practical positing. But the actual mover is appetite, and appetite includes will coupled with desire, and it will be a 5-step process. Speculative intellect posits the praxis-based practical mind. Practical mind encodes and imprints the appetite of the will, so the will is the thoughtful side of the appetite. Appetite of will is then enjoined with appetite of desire, which is the sensate side of the appetite. And the synthesis of the two provides the inertia for the act of existence in order to realize the practical good that we intend. So appetite goes out of itself in action and return. But the practical good can become contaminated because the appetite of the thoughtful will is eschatologically projected and oriented toward the speculative work, but appetite of desire is always directed toward the present at the sensate level. Speculative mind and practical mind are spatially inseparable. They're part of the one subject, but they are distinct in their modalities of positing. And metaphorically, Aristotle says that the realm of positing is like a ball and socket joint. You've got that two aspects of the joint working together to produce movement. Just like you've got speculative universal mind functioning as that which is stationary, but then you've got the moving, pivoting, posited, practical mind and practical good that is as an intentionality that is the other part of that joint that needs to function as the form that will, in an inertia type way, will move the body toward the act of existence. The soul is the form of act, the form of the body. But in all of Aristotle's work on the soul, he more or less spreads out his true philosophy of mind in so many other areas in his logic and in his metaphysics, that his work, his treatise on the soul, is very specifically just basically this triad outline. He doesn't really get beyond the triad outline regarding his treatise on the soul. It's very basic, and you have to get into other works of Aristotle to apprehend any further work in the philosophy of mind. But he does give us a little bit of additional work, because this time we did pick up the additional work of recollection, and we do understand that recollection is actually situated in the sentient soul for Aristotle. It is not in the cognitive intellect, it's in the sentient soul, and the sentient soul does participate in the rational. That's important to understand. It was also true for Aquinas. Aquinas said the sentient soul does share in the rational base. The rational base kind of permeates all of the soul, regardless of the modality. Reason influences every modality of the soul. And likewise, Aristotle tells us that the sentient soul is the realm of the work of the recollection, which is associative work of associating the event we're presently considering with associative concepts that can help us to interpret and to raise generalizations to signification. So associative work is the primary enlisted tool for the cognitive mind in evaluating generalizations to ascertain their deeper, more meaningful significance for existential being. And then once we grasp that deeper significance, we can actually give the generalization a sign, name, or a conceptual name, and raise the generalization, and then form our hierarchy of being, our hierarchy of universal being as a universal sign model. But that cannot remain abstract. It has to become closed down to a praxis-based practical modality and a practical movement of practical mind, which is coupled with appetite. But it's an informed appetite. It's informed on the side of the will, which must compete against the sensate side of desire. And so we have a positing that is in tension. It's a tensioned positing. It's tension between will and desire, thought and sensation and sensate desire. So it's always partially contaminated, because sensate desire will partially contaminate the pure thoughtful side of our positing ideal. And then once we actualize it in our act of existence, historical reality itself will also qualify that action with its sensate side, and we will have some feedback that will further help us to refine our sign model. We'll get a return out of positing. A return out of positing is a return of perfections, as Aquinas puts it, and that return of perfections will help us to refine our sign model and help us to also refine our ability to recall, to recollect. It'll help us refine recollection as well. So the return of perfections will influence all of the soul, including the sentient soul and its recollection work, because that does participate in reason. So it gives us a little bit more to go on. We did get the subsystem for the sentient soul, but basically the treatise on the soul by Aristotle does not really give us his philosophy of mind whatsoever. It gives us his framework. And his framework is a triad of sensation, cognition, and movement. And that's all he wants to really present is sensation, cognition, and movement. And then read his other original works in metaphysics and in logic, and you can fill in the gaps in his philosophy of mind. But as far as we got here on his treatise on the soul, we have the basic triad structure.